G'day, AAMCA. We're here with Anne Rawls, Professor of Sociology at Bentley University in Massachusetts, talking about ethnomethodology and the work of Garfinkel. So, Anne, tell me about Garfinkel's work and in particular the much commented on writing style and how that fitted in with his project and what he was trying to achieve with ethnomethodology.
I think I tried to explain that in a couple of the introductions to the books. And it's very important. Sometimes I've compared it to what Marx was trying to do, that words, forms of speech, incorporate ways of thinking. Marx would have said reification. And if you're proposing that things stand in different relationships to each other than what's usually proposed, then the language that people take for granted is not going to work for talking about the new relationships. In Garfinkel's case, as with Marx, it's particularly a poignant problem because Garfinkel is arguing that objects don't just exist, they need to be accomplished. Mm-hmm. And the process of their accomplishment is what we're looking at. And, we have a language that treats parts of speech as standing in a referential relationship with epistemic objects, and you need to use that language in order to talk about the theory that says that no, they, in fact, don't have that ontological characteristic. So Garfinkel uses a lot of phrases like as of which, the car as a feature of the situation as of which it is a part. And those are very difficult clauses and, very difficult statements for people. But if you begin to think about the fact that he's trying to set the accomplishment of objects into a contingent relationship, with other aspects of the sentence or statement that are talking about their accomplishment, then you can see that there's nothing accidental at all about this. It's very, very well thought out, extremely important. If you listen to him talk or give lectures explaining things, all of the same language is there in his speech. It's not about writing. It's about how you have to talk in order to not, create a false impression about the relationships you're setting up. I imagine Wittgenstein had, a similar kind of an issue with language. And when you read, philosophical investigations, and you get these long, paragraphs in which Wittgenstein is trying to work out similar kinds of relationships, I think the problem is a very, very similar one. I also think that one of the reasons that Garfinkel, the most important aspects of the work are very often misunderstood, you could say the same thing about Wittgenstein, is that people want to put it back into plain and simple language. And if you do that, you lose what was really important about what was being proposed, again, in both cases. So I think I've encouraged people to, read it more than once. And as Garfinkel would say, don't just read it, but if it's talking about something that's done, try to do the thing along with, with the reading so that you begin to understand what's being proposed. And when I first met Garfinkel and encountered ethnomethodology back in 1974, 1975, it was at a summer course that he was giving, and for the end of the semester there was going to be a party, and I was given the job of making the cake. So, there were people doing invitations, food, so I was responsible for the cake. And we sort of decided this halfway through a 6-week semester. So I had 3 weeks to think about what an ethnomethodology cake was. And it's related to the discussion of language, because I wanted to think about the cake as a cake. And if you're going to produce a cake for a party, it's a real cake, right? So in what sense was I going to think about this cake as an ethnomethodology cake, so that what I produced was going to be special, for this occasion? And so I walked around for 3 weeks. You have to decorate a cake with this, imagined cake in mind, imagining what the decorations on the cake would be. And I always knew it was wrong. I would see it, there would be things on it. And at one point, I had gotten to the idea that I needed to put brackets on the cake, that if it was about ethnomethodology, it had to involve the issue of bracketing, but I was still putting them on the cake. And then one day, I think I was walking across the street, and I realized that if it was an ethnomethodology cake, it had to be a cake accomplished as a feature of the situation as of which it was a part, which wouldn't be a cake if it wasn't, right? And it went from being a cake with brackets on it to being a bracketed cake. Now, I drove the baker crazy, and the baker kept saying to me, "This is not a cake. I contracted with you to decorate a cake. What you're bringing me is not a cake," because I had baked 6, brackets and cake? Yeah, 6 big 2-foot long by 18-inch wide sheets of cake. And I had cut them into 2 end brackets, and then the letter C, the letter A, the letter K, and the letter E. And now I wanted this guy to decorate this thing. And he was telling me all the ways in which this was not, in fact, a cake, which is perfect for me, because, I wanted it to only be a cake in its situated accomplishment. But he was saying, it's not a cake, I can't decorate it because it was cut. The crumbs came off on the knife. He couldn't get the frosting to stick. And I talked him into it, paid him extra money, and then when I went to pick it up, he told me all the new baking practices that he had to invent to get this thing decorated, which was not a cake. He had to freeze it so that the crumbs wouldn't come off. He had to get a thin layer on and then freeze that, so he was full of complaints about how this was not a cake, And so I knew that I had, in fact, understood, finally, what this task was. And so I, delivered it, and there are some photographs of that sort of, lying there at the party. But for me, that exercise, and that's the way Garfinkel always recommended that people go about this, that exercise sort of worked out what this language was about. Now, the other question about the relationship between ethnomethodology and sociology, Garfinkel always insisted that he was a sociologist, first, last, and always. And I think that the more I read the early unpublished work, the more I understand how deeply he meant that. He was working with the leaders of the discipline. He was working on a different vision that they had of, how sociology would develop, that was less mathematical, that didn't involve complex models, that focused on what people were actually doing, but they were doing it as sociologists in the mainstream, And they were the leaders of the discipline, and this was happening in the late 30s, right up until 1948.
Mm.
And what most people don't realize is that Garfinkel completed his master's degree before the war. He is a man of the pre-war generation. He gets associated with the 60s or at best the 50s. But that's not his generation. So from 1939 through, all during the war, he was working as a professional sociologist in the Army, writing studies for the Army on, that eventuate as labeling theory and, other very important ideas that are developed later. In 1946 and 1947, he's working with very important people at Harvard, Jerome Bruner, Talcott Parsons, Robert Bales, and the work on trust comes out of that period of time. What we think of now is mainstream sociology, taking on a particular vision of what science is, hadn't yet developed. If you look at the discussion that was occurring, and you can see it in the presidential addresses, of ASA during those years, you'll see urging we have to be scientific. You'll see the first discussions about what it really meant and trying to force it, which by 1948, 9 had really started to become a fait accompli. But when Garfinkel was, coming up and writing his first important manuscripts, it hadn't happened yet. So he was working with, Wilbert Moore, blanking on names, McCrae, Duncan McCrae, Elliot Mishler, and as I said, Talcott Parsons. Later he was working with Goffman, but not until after 1953. In the earlier period, there was a project going at Princeton. He and very important other people like Gregory Bateson and Herbert Simon were working on a situated natural language, sort of emergent rationality version of sense-making, cognition, in the context of computing and technology. And Bateson was involved in that camp at the same time he was involved with the Macy, what became known as cybernetics group. Well, the cybernetics, in the short run, won out. The natural language people, I think, now are finally coming into their own. And Garfinkel was the organizer of the original, natural language attempt to work on information and computing in 1951, 2, 3 at Princeton. Working with the leaders. And Simon was a leader in economics, and Bruner was a leader in psychology, and certainly Moore and Parsons, and Howard Odum, people that he worked with, leaders in sociology, Robert Bales. He wasn't a rebel in the sense of being marginal. He was certainly urging new ideas on people, but hand in hand with them. And so then there comes a point in the 50s and 60s where only a particular way of working in sociology is accepted anymore. And at that point, it's not possible to locate Garfinkel in the middle of that. And so the idea that somehow he's marginal to sociology or isn't a sociologist, really comes from the later period. But that's not what he was doing. His project was always, this is sociology, this is what I'm doing. There's another part of that history. There's a presidential address given in 1946, I think it's 46, it might be 47, by Carl Taylor. It's called Sociology of Common Sense. It's was published, it must have been given in 46 because it was published the year before Garfinkel's 1948 manuscript was completed. And what Taylor is saying is this version of science, that the leaders of a discipline are pushing is the wrong way to go. He said, the government doesn't need you to be scientific. The government needs you to be doing things that have practical, common sense application. And he gives a lot of examples. And they're very close to the kinds of things that Garfinkel is talking about. Taylor says, we need to know how people actually do their work. So when the government goes into a place to do something and make a change, we know, right, what the effect of the change is going to be. Taylor was in charge of the Tennessee Valley, authority projects and other big ones like that. He said, I need to hire people. And he said, you're not turning out anybody who can do field work. You're not turning out anybody who knows how to look at the world and see what's happening. You're only turning out mathematicians and modelers. So I have to go to anthropology and psychology to hire people. He's president of the ASA. Now, when the mathematical demographic modeling kind of sociology won out, Taylor was what do we call them? Head of the Department of Agriculture in the United States. And he facilitated the split between rural sociology and sociology in the United States as a way of preserving and facilitating the kind of sociological work that he needed to have done, because the mainstream version of science was making it impossible. The SSSP split off at this point, Society for the Study of Social Problems. I mean, there was a lot of fragmenting that occurred because they were trying to force a unified vision on the discipline. So histories of a discipline paint this as a gradual change, beginning in 1900 and gradually changing. You really focus on that period, 1940 to 1946, you see, no, there's nothing gradual about it. It's a wartime panic phenomenon. And we're still saddled with the results of it. So as a discipline, we suffer, but in particular, the understanding of Garfinkel's relationship to the discipline has suffered, from the timing of these things and from his positioning vis-a-vis that 6-year switch over.
Great.
So.
Thank you for your interview.
You're welcome.